Good morning. The House Energy Policy Committee will come to order. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Chairman Glenn.
Here.
Representatives Haupt.
Here.
Barrett.
Here.
Cole.
Here.
Tedder.
Here.
Salino. Here. Farrington.
Here.
Griffin.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
LaFave.
Here.
Lowers. Riley.
Here.
Lisinski.
Here.
Dianda. Garrett.
Here.
Camilleri.
Here.
Elder.
Here.
Green.
Here.
Sneller.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Before we get on to the main item of the day, we have before us for action House Bill 5837, introduced by Representative Aaron Miller. If anybody has any further questions about that bill, we have Jim Weeks with the Michigan Municipal Electric Association available to answer them. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. I know that Representative Lauer is going to be with us. I saw him. He had another meeting, but said he would be here quickly. So we will wait off on that. Members, just be prepared that when Representative Lauer is able to join us, we're going to vote on the introduction or the reporting of House Bill 5837 regarding out-of-state electrical providers being able to participate in in-state cooperatives such as at South Bend in his district. The main issue before us today is Senate Bill 637 and House Bill 637 and Senate Bill 894, the former by Senator Hune, the latter by Senator Knopf. We're going to let me give you an overview of what's going to happen today. We're going to start off with a panel of, it looks like, 4 people who are going to come up together in favor of the legislation. Now, I've heard complaints from citizens over the years that the proponents of a bill get so much time, they get to go on forever and ever, et cetera, and then we're limited to only 2 minutes each. That's not going to happen today. We're going to have 4 people up in favor all at once, and we have what those who are concerned about this legislation have identified to me as being like their lead witness, a lady who has come all the way from Israel to testify. So I have said that she will get 30 to 45 minutes. And of course, it may go longer than that on both the panel and that first witness from the opposition, because in this committee, the purpose is to provide citizens an opportunity to testify. But the point of that is to educate the committee. So if committee members have questions, we let them ask their questions until they feel they have reached a position of comfort and understanding. We're going to go from now until 10:30, at which time this committee is going to recess. I'm told that anybody who wants to stay until the afternoon can do so in room 502, is that correct? Which would be right across the way, in case there are those who want to wait until what we estimate will be somewhere in the area of 2:30 to 3 o'clock, at which time we will return and go no later than 5 o'clock. Because if we go after 5, that takes into account the sergeants at arms and others, support staff who'd have to stay after 5. So we're going to do that. It is also my intention to hold at least one additional hearing after the recess. And I'd made a commitment that we would give at least 30 days notice to that. So that's the intention of the schedule here today. We're going to invite the first 4 witnesses in support of the legislation, and that would be John Jones with Sprint, David Lewis and Andy Emerson with AT&T, Neil Krevda with Verizon, and Frank Alcavetti Jr. with T-Mobile. At whatever time Representative Lauer rejoins us, we will break away, very briefly away from this legislation and take a vote on the Miller legislation, then return to testimony. Gentlemen, you know the drill. Please press the red button. We look forward to hearing your testimony.
Well, good morning. Good morning, Chairman Glenn and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to be here today to speak in support of Senate Bill 637. I'd like to thank Senator Hune for his leadership in the Senate in getting this bill successfully through the Senate and his support for it today. For those of you who I have not met, my name is David Lewis, and I proudly serve as the new president.
David, pardon just a second.
Yes.
Senator, do you want to join this panel?
Sure, I'd love
to. Please come forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Thank you for being here,
Chairman,
Senator.
would I concede to the senator to make a couple comments first, please?
As he desires.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and I apologize for my tardiness, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, colleagues, it's good to see you. Please be easy on us, it's my birthday today. And someone asked me, are you 40 again? And I actually said, no, I'm actually 38. And that's the truth. But thank you. When I was first deciding on taking this issue up and championing this issue, I started thinking about our own personal life. And what I mean there is, I represent Livingston County and Western Washtenaw County, and I see my good colleague from Washtenaw County on the committee. It's good to see you. And my community, we are very blessed economically. Livingston County has the highest median household income and the highest median household value of any county in the state, but we have some deficiencies in our internet system in Livingston, certainly Western Washtenaw County. In fact, about 3 years ago, my wife and I moved to a different part in Livingston County, a little town called Gregory. And we have, like I said, such wonderful economic numbers, but we moved to Gregory and had 0 internet service. 0. And it's funny because our 3-year-old thinks that internet is a basic human right. And he hollers every time the internet does go out. But fortunately, about 4 or 5 months ago, our friends at Frontier were able to provide some internet service to a large portion of my district, in fact, the area where we actually live. But this bill that's before us, before you folks, will it address rural internet service? No, not immediately. But I'm here to tell you, whatever barrier that we can break down in terms of what government has in place that prohibits or inhibits investment in internet service, I'm here to champion. And again, will it impact rural internet service? No, probably not immediately. But I'm here to say, please consider this, because it's a basic service that government can actually just get out of the way and allow private enterprise to invest in. And when I was first approached on this issue, there was talk about some municipalities and states across the country. I'm going to squeeze over a little bit further. And I pulled up a San Diego Union Tribune article from just last year, 2017. And I'm not sure if California was actually working on legislation or what have you, but there was a good couple of comments in that article, and it said that local governments were going to be sacrificing revenue if something like this type of legislation was put in place, because in San Diego, the annual permit fee per small cell, each individual small cell, which in some instances isn't much bigger than that laptop, was $3,000 per antenna, per small cell. $3,000. And in order for this system to actually work appropriately, you need to have many of those, oftentimes many of those in a geographic area, to have appropriate internet service that really fulfills the 5G intent. And what is 5G? It's approximately 20 times faster than 4G. And these guys hopefully won't correct me on that, but 20 times faster. So just think of this. If you're at home and you can download a movie, you can download 20 movies in the speed that you're downloading one movie on 4G. And if you look at your internet service and it's fast and you think it's pretty darn fast, this is considered almost instantaneous. So the legislation before us does many things. First, it expedites the permitting process, breaking down one significant barrier, because in municipalities across the country, it could take years upon years to actually get a small cell 5G system approved and then ultimately built. And it also standardizes and caps fees that these internet providers will ultimately pay to local governments. And in each instance, there is a fee set in the bill. And as many of you folks know, I don't really do fees. But in order for this investment to take place, there needs to be certainty. But again, there is a cap. So this, the legislation before you allows local governments to charge less than what is in the bill in terms of a set rate. So there are set rates, but again, the local governments can charge less. So I'm here before you to say thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being a few minutes tardy. I'm certainly more than willing to answer questions, but the techies next to me certainly know the industry much better than I do. And it's kind of funny that I'm helping to champion a technology piece of legislation based on technology, because I just assume not even have a cell phone. But with that, I say thank you again, and this is going to be extremely important when we talk about autonomous vehicle motorization and motoring in the future, because this is almost an essential technology for the autonomous vehicle wave that's coming. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank you, colleagues, my friends, and I'll sit up here and answer questions if folks have.
Senator, happy birthday.
Thank you.
And out of respect for your schedule, if members of the committee have questions of Senator Hune, would you like us to ask those now or wait until the end? So anybody got a question of Senator Hune? So, Senator, if you want to stay, you're certainly welcome, but we don't have any questions at this time.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, Senator Hune, thank you for your leadership, sir. At AT&T, we are proud to make investments in and driving innovation for Michigan's communications infrastructure. Senate Bill 637 is about both of those, investment and innovation. Wireless technology has dramatically changed the way we live and work. We now operate in an information and demand-driven economy where businesses and the customers they serve increasingly need and expect to be readily connected to one another, no matter where they are. Senate Bill 637 and the small cell technology it facilitates will grow and nurture this economy for the state of Michigan. Small cells are a new and crucially important technology needed to increase broadband capacity in areas where large amounts of people are using a vast array of wireless devices to search and download a lot of information. Small cell technology will also serve as a cornerstone, as was just stated, on the coming 5G networks that our devices will all use in the future. Not only that, this technology and our ability to deploy it will help usher in innovations like the Internet of Things, driverless vehicles, and smart cities. We at AT&T are proud to be the founding members of the American Center for Mobility that recently opened at Willow Run and is leading the way on autonomous vehicle technology. Automated vehicle technology will ultimately rely on 5G networks to meet its full potential, and Senate Bill 637 can help make that happen. In closing my remarks, this bill before you is a result of many hours of work, study, but most importantly, compromise. Many people from different organizations and groups have weighed in, and support is widespread. So again, I thank you for your time as I rise in support of this bill, and I pass the mic to my colleague, Neil Krebda.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my name is Neil Krevda. I work for Verizon, and I have for the last 30 years. It was GT before it turned into Verizon. I've lived in Indiana my whole life, worked in Indiana for the company my whole life. I'm pretty much very supportive of the bill, which the committee can probably understand. I only will bring forth, because I know we have a lot of people to testify today, one example, and this was last week. I was in Floyd's Knob, Indiana, which is a very small community, which you would probably tell by the size, but it's across the river from Louisville. And it's a very growing pretty quickly because of the bedroom community status it has with Louisville. We have permitted the legislation passed in Indiana, so we permitted 3 small cells, and the reason the small cells are being used in Floyd's Knob is because the macro towers that we normally use in our network system, and that's what's been built across the United States, we can use the small cells to feed off of those macro towers and take care of areas where we have capacity issues. And that's the one thing that I think it was discussed in the Senate, and I thought you guys needed to hear. The thing with macro sites is those can be placed almost anywhere you can. We monitor our network 24/7 every minute of the day. So once we see where we're having, a situation where we're having capacity issues, a small cell can be permitted, can be built, and relatively incorporated into the network pretty quickly, and we can answer the issues for our customers and your constituents. And Verizon and Neil Krevda, we support the bill, and we appreciate having the time to be here today, and I will help answer any questions at the end. And I will pass this over to John Jones.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, can you hear me okay without using the mic? John Jones with Sprint. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you for coming in so early.
John, pardon a second. Does anybody with tech know whether or not he'll be picked up for the recording of the hearing? Let's have you switch chairs if you don't mind, John.
Of course. Again, good morning. John Jones with Sprint. Thank you for being here so early this morning. We appreciate the time and the consideration. I've had the pleasure of representing Sprint now in 22 states. I've personally been involved in about 15 of these bills nationwide. And I'd like to focus on, as my colleague from AT&T touched upon, the hours of work, compromise, and study that went into this bill that's before you. We started this process a while ago. In fact, when Senator Knopf and Senator Hune called us together, I don't want to overstate it, but I think easily 40 hours of sitting in compromise rooms with, frankly, organizations that could have just said, no, we're not going to sit down, we're just going to oppose it. But I think those organizations saw some potential benefit in having the conversation, and in the end we crafted what I think is probably one of the best small cell deployment bills in the Midwest, if not the nation. More importantly, what we did is we crafted a process that I have emulated in all my other states that I work because it worked. We sat down with the local government units and their associations. We argued. We fought. And then we compromised. And that's the bill that's before you now. As you have technical testimony today, it is my hope that you come to the conclusion that this is a bill you can vote for proudly. A bill that you can vote for knowing that you're doing a great service to the state of Michigan and the constituents that you serve. With that said, we are here to serve you and are willing and able to answer any questions that you have, and if not, we'll find the answers for you right after the committee. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Frank Accavetti. I'm with the Accavetti Consulting Group. We are under contract with T-Mobile to represent them here in the state of Michigan. On behalf of T-Mobile, I want to inform the committee that T-Mobile is in favor of both bills. We look forward to building out our network in the state of Michigan to bring 5G to citizens from the bottom of the state all the way up to the Upper Peninsula, which is, of course, we all know, poorly served when it comes to broadband and internet access. Mr. Chairman, on a personal note, I would like to commend you. As former vice chairman and former chairman of this committee, I am very impressed with the fact that you bring your members all the information they need to make a good decision for the state of Michigan. And you're doing a great job, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Andy Emerson. I'm a lawyer partner with the law firm of Porter Wright Morrison Arthur in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm here today on behalf of AT&T. I represent AT&T nationwide on wireless deployment efforts, and I've worked on multiple state small cell bills I had the pleasure over the last 8 months or so of working with Senator Noss and Senator Hune on a collaborative effort with many stakeholders to negotiate the bill that you have before you today. And it's the product of a lot of compromise, as you've heard. I'd like to give you some highlights from the bill, and when I'm done doing that, I'm happy to answer any questions about how the language in the bill operates, any concerns you might have about the language. So first of all, the bill provides a uniform process for fees. So there's an application fee of $200 for co-locations of small cell facilities. There's an application fee of $300 for a replacement of a pole or a new pole in the public right-of-way. There's rent of $30 for a co-location on an authority pole. And there's right-of-way access fees of $20 for a co-location and $125 to place a new pole in the public right-of-way. There's a uniform process for permitting, which is very important to encourage investment in the state. It sets straight timelines, deemed granted timelines of 60 days for a co-location and 90 days for a new pole. Both of those deadlines are subject to potentially 30 additional days, depending on whether or not there's another application that's pending before the authority, or if there's any reason the authority would like an additional 15 days that's provided in that timeline. A big product of the negotiation was the addition of tools for authorities to protect the aesthetics of their right-of-way. So there's language in here that allows spacing requirements to avoid pole clusters. There's language in the bill that allows the local authority to promulgate local design guidelines in historic downtown and residential districts. There's language in the bill that provides the ability to suggest alternative locations. So an example of that is if an applicant wants to put in a new pole in public right-of-way, the authority can suggest a location within 75 feet of the proposed location. There's language in here that requires the applicant to actually have the site operational within 1 year. There are height restrictions in the bill. So to qualify for a permitted use under this, you need to have, for a new pole, it needs to be under 40 feet above ground level. For a co-location of a new wireless facility on an existing structure, it can be no higher than 5 feet above the existing structure. The operator must comply with rules requiring structures or facilities to be placed underground. So if you have undergrounding districts, someone needs to comply with that when they come in. There's also language in here that specifically protects any historic districts as defined under both Michigan law and federal law. The authorities can condition approval on relocation requirements. This was another concern that came up in the negotiations that we added into the bill. There's grandfathering language in the bill to the extent any authority has an existing agreement with a wireless provider right now. There's grandfathering language in the bill. There's the ability to have bonding requirements associated with removal of abandoned or unused equipment. You can have negotiated both indemnity and insurance provisions. So there's quite a bit of discretion for authorities to add additional language into the uniform process that's in the bill. Lastly, the bill is competitively neutral. The same rules apply to cable operators as apply to wireless providers. As you heard, the industry is in full support of this bill. We're happy to answer any questions you may have about how the language operates.
Does any member of the committee have any questions? Representative Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here very much. Could you just, before we get started on this, outline the size of these small cell boxes that'll be placed in the right-of-way, and then outline if you currently have any infrastructure in the right-of-ways?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'm just going to page 7 of the bill, the definition of a small cell wireless facility. So each antenna has to be within 6 cubic feet, and the associated equipment, as you see on the next page, is 25 cubic feet. 25, we originally started at 28. I think we came down to 25. So That's the size of the structures we're talking about. Each of the wireless carriers on the panel here will have different deployments. Senator Hune mentioned the size of the laptop here. It'll vary depending on the deployment, but these are the size parameters in the bill.
And then, do you currently have infrastructure in the right-of-ways?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely. All these companies have infrastructure in the right-of-ways right now.
I have a follow-up question to that. Mayor in the district that I represent is concerned that each one of your individual companies will require their own set of poles so that you don't just have one pole that has everybody's small cell technology, but you might have poles every 10 or 20 feet to allow open competition between all the providers. Is that the case, or what does the bill provide?
Mr. Chairman, depending on the carrier, each carrier has their different network needs and has an existing network out there right now on why they're deploying small cells. But speaking on behalf of my client, AT&T, the preferred methodology is to actually deploy on existing vertical infrastructure in the public way. Okay, so a street light, wooden electric distribution utility pole, etc. If there's no pole available, and these are low-powered antennas that only propagate 300 to 800 feet or so. So if there's nothing in that area that's existing right now, there may be a need for new wireless support structure. Under the bill, there's more tools to the municipality in terms of, regulating the placement of that new pole, if that were the case. But I guess the answer is it depends. But certainly the preferred deployment would be to go on an existing structure, both from an economic standpoint and for just, using the existing network that's out there.
And roughly speaking, how far apart would the poles have to be?
Mr. Chairman, sorry, it depends. And the reason I'm saying it depends is what we're talking about is another layer to an existing wireless network that's out there. So as you heard from the panel earlier, you have macro towers out there right now that propagate over, a mile or so. And then as you have additional users come on the network, and we've had extraordinary increases in data usage over the last 10 years, you've had to build more capacity into the network. You can't create more spectrum, so you have to reuse the existing spectrum. And so to do that, they're bringing these smaller facilities down closer to the user. And so depending on if it's a busy corner, you may have to have a couple small cells within a block. If it's an area that doesn't have that much foot traffic in an area, let's say, you may not need to have one every block. So it really depends on the deployment, Mr. Chairman.
It's based on the concentration of users then?
That is a key component, Mr. Chairman, is the capacity point, which you mentioned. The other part of this, which is a very exciting part, is the frequencies that are used by all the carriers to do this have propagation characteristics that allow very low latency. So when I say latency, we're talking about how quick something loads on a page. So for autonomous vehicles, et cetera, you can't afford to have poor latency. And so a really key component of small cells is to actually have zero latency. And that is a very exciting part of 5G technology.
Thank you. Representative Vice Chair Lisinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I have leave to ask a couple questions in a row here?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Senator Hune. And I wanted to reiterate one of the points that Senator Hune made very clear, which was that the intent of this bill was not to expand access, or would not result in expanded access to internet in our rural areas or in our unserved areas, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, excuse me if I don't understand the protocol, I'll just keep doing it that way, but it depends. And I say that because, for the most part, this solution, because it's a low-powered antenna, is only going to propagate 300 to 800 feet or so. But you'd be surprised. There are instances based on geography where something may be in a traditionally rural area. If it's an intersection or something off a highway and there's a gas station, et cetera, there may be a deployment for a small cell that we're not anticipating. But I think as a general matter, it is accurate that this is not an immediate solution for rural broadband.
So when I look at entire townships in my district that are unserved, completely unserved, this is not a solution for them. And the reason I'm making this point is because there was a packet of letters of support that were given to us, from a broad swath of Michigan. But my concern is that in about a half a dozen, 4 or 5 6 of them is the statement that we are writing in support of this bill to expand access to high-speed wireless technology in rural Michigan. And so that just offers me a little bit of concern that that's coming from some of our agricultural industry and supporters, and that they have that impression. So I just want to make sure that we don't leave here with the impression that if you're in an entirely unserved township or county, that this is going to make a material difference to your service. I just want to make sure that that is clear. My next question is along, I've got a couple questions from, just like the chair had questions from his local mayors, from city managers in my district, about the issue of access in terms of equity. And the idea that when we're focused so much on enhancing service versus expanding service, that we are growing further that digital divide. And so how would this, in urban areas, close the equity gap, the digital access and equity gap?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think you could have scenarios in an urban setting where certain parts of zone district perhaps did not receive coverage from a traditional macro site because of zoning challenges. And so a small cell, and under this bill, a company could deploy a small cell in public right-of-way under this uniform process, where before they could not achieve the same level of coverage in that same area. So you could have scenarios like that where absolutely there could be urban areas that currently don't have, let's say, 4G LTE speeds, which under this bill could receive a small cell that would provide not only 4G LTE speeds but 5G in the future.
And as I look across the state, particularly in our urban areas, the digital divide tends to be along socioeconomic means. And so what I see there is sometimes folks aren't able to afford a monthly subscription, and so they're much more phone dependent. They use that one subscription on their phone to do a lot of things. So that was one place that I actually saw this closing the digital divide when we look at socioeconomic and folks who are cell phone dependent and don't also have a second home cable or internet. So I feel that this bill is going to work to close that digital divide in our urban areas, but it's going to possibly exacerbate it with our rural areas, just because we're seeing increased investment in our urban areas, and that will use necessary capital dollars that will not then be available to expand in rural areas. So as folks have known, if this bill is in front of Energy, but on Communications and Technology Committee, which is where I also sit, that is the point that we're continually working there. So one last question before I finish here is the idea that technology is moving very quickly, and when 5G becomes, I don't know, 6G, 7G, 8Z, who knows? The removal of discarded and unused equipment, how does the bill provide for that? Discarded or no longer used equipment, how does it provide for those poles or that equipment to be removed from a community?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, there is language in here specifically that dealing with removal. I can point you to it if that's helpful.
Yes. Well, I'm just wondering about the kind of the time frame, and how does a city know that that pole or that equipment is no longer being used?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, there's language in here in the bill that actually requires written notice to the city that a site will no longer be used, and then you come under the removal provisions, and then I think there's actually language that allows the city to do it if the company doesn't actually do it. If you bear with me 1 second, I can give you the exact site
That's
number.
okay. We'll have it pulled up right there. Thank you. I
got
just
it?
wanted to make
Okay.
sure that that was addressed. That was another concern from my community, is that unused equipment would be removed promptly. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you can see, there's a number of individuals in this room today that have serious concerns about this as regards to their health. And so my question is, if one of your companies decides to put one of these small cells up at a pole that's within, say, 50 feet of one of their houses, what recourse do they have to say, is there a way to move it somewhere else? Does the homeowner have any recourse on that or not?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, there's language in the bill at page 15, lines 1 through 5, that allow, and this was something that was negotiated as part of the stakeholder group for this exact concern, so that the authority can require the applicant to come forth with certification of compliance with the FCC's rules related to radio frequency emission from the proposed facility. The authority can bake this right into the actual application requirements. That certification is required as part of your permit to deploy. Does that answer your question, Representative? Okay.
Just to follow up, the language would allow a city to do so, to require that, but it does not require a city to do so. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, it gives the discretion to the authority to require this, if they so choose.
Representative Lauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to learn a little bit more about how the maintenance aspect would work when you're going to locate on a public asset like a light pole, something like that. Let's say the city has to go through and either replace it or they're going to do some maintenance on it, painting, things of that nature. How does that work in terms of your equipment once it's located on there? Do you simply take it off so they can do that, or how would that be addressed?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so your question is, you already have a small cell deployed on a street light. The city wants to do some maintenance to it. How does that work with the city with respect to that? Okay. There's language in the bill that allows essentially the terms and conditions associated with a co-location, a standard co-location on an authority pole, to be worked out between the applicant and the authority. So if maintenance is a concern, future maintenance is a concern for the city, they can put that right in the actual terms of the permit for the co-location.
So there's nothing that would restrict their ability to require some language in there that would say you'd move your assets while they were, basically refurbishing the light pole and then put it back on, things of that nature.
That's right, Mr. Chairman, Representative. There's language in there that allows that. In fact, it can have you relocate too. So if there's a road widening, or if there's some sort of district change that the city wants you to move, there's language in here that gives the authority that power also.
Thank you very much.
Representative Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and forgive me if you already answered this question, but out of curiosity, I'm trying to figure out what's trending now from a 4G that is different, that is now causing our data to run slower. What are people accessing? What are they searching the web for that's causing the data to run slower, which is causing us now to need to have access to 5Gs, and then maybe like the minority chair said, 6Gs and 7Gs. What's trending? Can you explain that? And then also, could you just tell us what are some of the issues in regards to zoning? And then I'll come back and ask some more questions.
Representative Garrett, my
Yes.
apology for the interruption. If you would hold that thought, we have one member who has to go to a different committee, and we do have one other action, as I indicated before us, on which we do not want him to have to miss any votes. Also, Vice Chair Houck makes a motion that we approve the minutes of the last meeting without objection, so ordered. I will entertain a motion at this time to report House Bill 5837 to the floor. No, not this bill, not this bill. This is the bill referencing electrical co-ops across state lines. I will entertain a motion to move 5837. Representative Johnson so moves. Mr. Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Chairman Glenn?
Yes.
Representatives Houck?
Yes.
Barrett?
Yes.
Cole?
Yes.
Tedder?
Yes.
Bellino?
Yes.
Barrington?
Yes.
Griffin?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
LaFave?
Yes.
Lauer?
Yes.
Riley?
Yes.
Lisinski?
Yes.
Dianda? Garrett?
Yes.
Camilleri?
Yes.
Elder?
Yes.
Green?
Yes.
Sneller?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 18 yeas, 0 nays, and 0 pass.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and my apology again, Representative Garrett. And, sir, if you would now respond as you wish to Representative Garrett's question.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Representative, good question. There's been a huge increase in mobile data minutes. So this is people streaming video on their mobile devices. And just like the Vice Chair mentioned, people rely on their phones more than ever to do things now. It's a replacement for typically what we used to do at our homes. And so this increase in mobile data usage has caused this capacity crunch. And as I mentioned briefly earlier, you can't create more spectrum. It's a finite resource. And so you have mobile data minutes going up You have more people on flat rate plans going up, and you have limited spectrum, and so you need something to do to deal with our customers and your constituents' needs. That's what's driving this. In terms of your second question, Representative, about zoning, the key thing for everyone to understand about this bill is we're talking about a permitted use in public right-of-way. If you're outside of the public right-of-way, you're going to go through any traditional zoning procedure that the local authority may have. So I think that answers your question, but please let me know if it doesn't.
One follow-up, Mr. Chair. So provide me with some reasons authorities have indicated in preventing why they would like to prevent small cells in their jurisdictions.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it's not so much that they're preventing that people come out with a notion of I don't want small cells in my jurisdiction. I think the best way to look at it in terms of a state policy perspective is what can the state do to encourage this investment in the state? And having a uniform process and a uniform fee structure is extremely useful for encouraging that investment. And here's why. If not, you're negotiating separate terms and conditions with every single different authority that you're stepping in front of. That takes time, that takes money. It's not a good way to push out new technology in the state. And so the practical component of that is it's purely a timing component. It takes forever to do these things. And I say that based on experience. It takes a lot of time to negotiate these. And then you end up with a permit by permit type analysis, which it's no way to deploy make a major network investment in a state.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. I certainly appreciate your testimony. And first, a question that sort of piggybacks on Representative Lauer's question about the co-location in the polls. So am I right in saying that there are going to be situations eventually where perhaps the different companies would be cooperating together and there could be co-location of more than one company on a pole, or no?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I think that'll be very unlikely that you'll share co-location on the same pole, primarily for technical reasons. The high band frequencies that are being used here, there is a very small guard band, and there can be interference in the signals. And you're talking also about equipment going on the same, these are small pieces of equipment, but there's only so much space if we're capping it at 40 feet right now for a new pole, for instance, where before you know it, you have multiple carriers coming down that pole. It's just not practical to have several deployments on the same pole.
Okay, and then, Mr. Chair, just one more question and then a comment. Thank you. So could you tell me right now, how are the signal boosters being used right now? For example, sports stadium. What examples can you give us that help us understand what that looks like and how it's already being used? And then I think that might also help everyone understand where it's going and how it will help. Could you do that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think a good example is a sports stadium, like you just mentioned, where I think the appropriate way to think about it is a distributed antenna system where you'd have multiple antennas throughout a stadium. So the Big House is a great example, okay? Or right here in Lansing is a good example. They have a DAS. And so instead of everybody sitting in that, you'll have strong signal coverage while you're sitting in your seat. You'll see 4 bars on there, but when you go to send a photo or something, it takes forever to happen. So instead of being on the macro network, the macro site that's right nearby the stadium, let's say, the DAS will offload all that traffic. You'll go to all the small antennas that are near each exit, let's say, and go onto the internet backbone in the basement of the stadium and out to the internet, onto the network of whatever the carriers, and there'll be multiple carriers that'll be hosted in that same spot. And so that'll allow throughput to occur in the stadium. That's a good example of how a DAS system works, which is somewhat similar to how a small cell polygon would work in an urban environment. Just imagine a very busy part of Lansing, multiple small cells, even right around the state capitol. Same scenario would work.
Thank you so much. And again, I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact that there are farmers and businesses and families that work from home in my district. My district is in between Kalamazoo and South Haven, Southwest, and the good vice chairwoman across the aisle was right when she said that this bill is not going to directly address underserved or unserved rural areas, but it's a barrier to growth for us. And we're losing house sales because of it. And I just wanted to appeal to you. You're all in the room today, and I think that technology is good, but at this point, I encourage you to keep going and keep reaching, because it isn't economic. It's to our advantage economically and quality of living wise with millennials to keep pushing out into those areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Griffin.
Mr. Chairman, can I address?
Yes.
This is Neil Krebda with Verizon. To address both of you, the federal government last year, there was CAF money and grant money put forth for a lot of the landline companies, and I'll get to my point. They're building out into the rural areas, that may be in Senator Hune's area, but in the case of where they're putting in fiber to reach those areas, that fiber is the same fiber that we're going to be needing for our small cells. So as that is put in, then that makes it much easier for us to move forward and build small cells to feed off of our macro towers as well.
Representative LaFave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, and my friends in the telecommunication business. I wanted to just bring up briefly that I represent what we describe in the Upper Peninsula as Michigan's only state fair in Escanaba, Michigan. And to give you an example of how this bill might be beneficial to the people of the state of Michigan, the Midwest, and everybody who enjoys going to Escanaba during the week of the state fair. Of course, I camp out there, not literally, but for about 16 hours a day, I'm at the state fairgrounds and talking to people and explaining what's going on in the state capitol. Unfortunately, just last year, I got a phone call from Speaker Leonard, and I went to answer it. Wouldn't work. I tried to text him back. I actually had to leave the facility to get to my speaker. Thankfully, he wasn't doing a call of the House. But there was no going on Facebook Live. There was no posting videos of me or any of the kids or any of the really cool events. The fair, the live auction for the youth couldn't be live streamed. So small cells would enable, in my understanding of the bill, to offload some of that data and make it so you can actually get a text message at the UP State Fair. And I think it would be beneficial from an economic development standpoint and investing in one of, I believe, the best facilities in the state of Michigan, which is our fairgrounds in downtown Escanaba. But making it so families, when they come to that campground and when they come to the fairgrounds, can actually be contacted by their colleagues, their bosses, or get in touch with their employees. So is it... am I correct that a couple of small cells scattered throughout the facility would take down some of that demand and make it so I'd be able to get in contact with the good representatives of whether it be the 46th district or the 2nd?
Mr. Speaker, Representative, yes, you're correct.
And really quickly, I had a conversation with my county road association. I've got 3 counties that I'm responsible for protecting and making sure that they have the tools they need to do their job as well. And one of the concerns that they had was that they'd be forced to put a pole at the end of a 3-way intersection. So you've got a road going this way, and they were concerned that it would be at the end of a dead end, and the telecom companies would tell them that they wanted to put the pole there, and there was nothing to stop them. My reading of the bill was that they would be able to ask that above-ground infrastructure be moved 50 or 70 feet to avoid kind of dangerous situations of putting a pole at the end of a one-way, or at the end of a dead end. Am I right about that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Speaker, or Representative, the bill has several pieces in there.
Don't worry, we're not going to allow that to happen.
That happens. The
guys appreciate the support.
The bill has several examples of where that. First of all, basis of a denial. So an authority can deny a permit request if there's a public safety issue, and sight lines, any work in the right of way, those sorts of things are a part of the basis of denial. You're also accurate. There is the ability for a new pole placement for the authority to suggest something within 75 feet of the proposed location. So there's a couple. The other thing too is these bills also each permit requires a work permit also to go out. So to the extent you're in the public right of way and you need to pull an encroachment permit to go do something, there's another layer of protection for the authority in terms of the work that's actually going to be done in the public right of way.
And so just really briefly, so just in concept, if you had one of those three-way intersections with the dead end right there, you might move the pole 20 feet east or west to make it so if a car does make a mistake and go through that they might hit a field instead of a big telecommunication pole.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Riley.
Thank you. Senator, since you're still here, I'll give this question to you, but if anybody else would like to join in, feel free. Okay. All right. So I understand that this was in the Senate for quite a while, this bill. And with that being said, I'd just like to know how much effort was put forward to address this, what most of these people or many of these people are here for, which are the health concerns. Was there any dialogue back and forth? Was there any working? Was there many studies evaluated to look at regarding this area?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative, thank you. I'll tell you, we had personally a ton of dialogue with folks that were concerned about this from the health aspect component of it. And I received an enormous amount of communications from them, folks that were concerned, and also from the supporters of the legislation dispelling some of the concerns. So as was mentioned earlier, there is language in the bill, and I'm not sure exactly where we're at in the bill, to allow local authorities, local units to require some health-related concerns in the legislation before a permit is ultimately granted.
Was there any evaluation of the studies that that was put forth from the other side? Like, I mean, as you know, being in there that long, I'm just trying to figure out, did you have experts evaluate the data that from the other side to see if this was credible or not?
Let me tell you our full process. We had introduced the bill, and it went to a work group of folks involved with the telecom industry, Chairman Knopfs, folks involved in local governments, and other vested interests involved that we sat and literally for tens of hours, I don't know, maybe 40, 50, 60 hours discussing the various components and aspects of the legislation. We had, I don't know how many committee hearings on it, folks in support of the bill, folks in opposition to the bills. And we received written testimony as well, folks in support, folks in opposition. We saw the research of folks that were concerned from the health aspect, and we saw the research of folks that were dispelling those health concerns. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but that's my explanation of it. It was a very lengthy process, and if you look at other issues that I've worked on in the legislature, I'm generally, let's march forward, and we got the votes, let's go forward. And Chairman Knopf did a fabulous job of bringing folks to the table. Maybe not every person that has concerns on the legislation was brought to the table, but Chairman Knopf did a yeoman's effort.
Okay, so from your perspective, you feel that there was a legitimate amount of time to evaluate the data that the opposition would have on this?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't put forth something that I didn't believe in. And I'll tell you, as I mentioned earlier, and it's been commented several times amongst the panel here, this is truly an economic development issue. Our 3-year-old, again at home, is outraged when we pull out the driveway and he's not able to access Wi-Fi. It is unbelievable, unbelievable to me how much of a utility that this is perceived as from younger generations.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Garrett.
One last question. Mr. Neal from Verizon. Good morning. I'm right here. I'm just wondering, because I don't see any breakdown in the bill as to how much of a cost will be imposed onto a Verizon customer?
There will be no cost on the Verizon customer as we build out our network.
Oh, wonderful.
I mean, the driver behind the cost would be the competitive nature of the industry, which is very competitive, and we don't foresee any increase in costs as we build it out.
So every time there's an increase in going from 5Gs to, like I said, maybe 8Gs down the line, the customer does not take on any additional cost at all?
I cannot say when we get to 8G, but as of right now, we don't have any plans for any additional costs as we build out the 5G network.
Okay, thank you.
Gentlemen, looks like that's all the questions we, Representative Barrett.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, what you're saying, though, is that your investment is already part of your monthly bill for future prospective investments and other things. There's certainly a cost to putting up any type of tower infrastructure improvement, but it's already more or less anticipated through your normal monthly bill.
Absolutely, our budget plan for the
You're not going to have a 5G line item on the bill, but it'll be part of your monthly subscription that you already have to go toward other infrastructure improvement through the network.
Absolutely. We upgrade the network every year. This is
Sure.
just a whole new building out of the whole new network.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Representative LaFave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just while I have all you guys here, please put some more infrastructure in the Upper Peninsula. We could really use the help. Thank you very much.
Gentleman, Representative Bolino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really hoping that someday parts of my district, like Berlin Township, which is 2.5 miles from Wayne County, or London Township, which is a 12-mile drive to Saline, can get some Wi-Fi. Those guys up there, farmers up there can't use the best technology we have out today because they don't have Wi-Fi. And people, small business people that are in their homes, can't work at home. They have to go to a Starbucks and buy coffee, maybe. I'm not sure. There's meetings today about that. And go somewhere else to do their work because they don't have Wi-Fi at home. And to the people in the back that groaned about the 3-year-old, when I'm having a tough time with my 3-year-old granddaughter, I give her my phone. She hits a YouTube icon and watches Mickey Mouse videos. So, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Last call. Gentlemen, we appreciate your testimony this morning. Senator Colbeck, we're going to ask you to come up next. You've indicated about 5 minutes. And Ms. Tackover, is that correct? Have I pronounced your name correctly? Daphne Tackover? You might want to move on up to the table if you wish. But Senator Colbeck says he's going to take about 5 minutes. We're going to allow lengthier testimony from Ms. Tackover. Let me say a comment about that. In the time constraint that we have today, obviously not everybody who's here and who even put in a card is likely to be able to testify today just from a time constraint. Because, according to people who have communicated with me, there are certain people they think are best capable of making the argument that you'd like to see made, Ms. Tackover being one of them. So we're going to give her an extended amount of time. But Senator Colbeck, if you would, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The presentation I was looking for is not on this machine, so I'll be brief. I'm going to focus in on a couple things. First of all, for those of you who know me, I'm a techie at heart, so this is not an issue of getting access to technology for people. I'm a certified Microsoft small business specialist. I've worked on space station designing the cabling system for the airlock module, where I was responsible for EMI, EMC analysis, which is electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic compatibility. This is not a foreign subject to me, but I do want to address some of the concerns that I've heard in some of the testimony today and some of the questioning, because there seems to be a couple false Easter eggs being put out there right now. I want to make sure we dispel that right off the gate. Number one, a lot of people apparently have been told that this is something that's going to help out with rural broadband, and I think one of the testimony, and to Senator Hune's credit, he identified that this is not going to help with rural broadband deployment at all. And believe me, as somebody who's been traveling all across the state, I realize the issue with getting a good cell and keeping a conversation going. I understand that it's something that's got to get addressed, but this bill is not addressing that at all. Second thing that I want to point out, and it was a carefully worded statement in the legislation that deals with people that are concerned about denial permit requests, right? So it's always pushed back to the definition of an acceptable limit, level of of radiation. And that's what this is, by the way. This is about radiation. This is not, and people need to understand that. What they will do on that denial of permit request, they'll point back to an FCC acceptable threshold for radiation levels. Everybody in this room needs to understand the FCC is staffed by former members of the telecommunications industry. They are effectively indemnified against adverse health impact lawsuits when the acceptable limits are higher than the limits actually shown to show harmful health effects. And I just want to dwell a little bit on some of those harmful health effects, if I could. Number one, we need to understand that we're all concerned about environmental impacts around PFAS and around lead in the water, all that kind of stuff. The health impacts associated with wireless radiation, when you actually read the laundry list of adverse health impacts, they're much more significant than even PFAS and what you see with the with lead in the water system. We're talking about carcinogenic effects due to tumors. We're talking about issues with DNA replication, which can lead to adverse issues in regard that part of the mechanism for leading to the carcinogenic effects, but also dealing with things, there's been ties to autism and other impacts as well on it, that I just encourage people to take a look at. This is, and that's why everybody's groaning, because when we're talking about 3-year-olds dealing with this, because the studies have also shown that the people most susceptible to these adverse health impacts are the youngest among us, because their blood-brain barrier has not been fully developed. That's why people are concerned about that. I know there's a convenience issue. I'm addicted to this stuff myself, right? This is an issue where I love the convenience of having wireless access. But I also know that in Article 4, Section 51 of our Michigan Constitution, our primary concern is supposed to be the health of our citizens. Amen. That is supposed to be the primary concern. And
folks, we've done our best to respect your right to be heard. I'm going to ask you to respond in kind and be respectful of this process and not express yourselves one way or the other in that way. So thank you very much for the rest of the day. Hope I don't have to ask again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to make sure people understand that constitutional duty. Now, this is not, all of us know in our hearts, we would not knowingly move our family, move our home next to a cell tower, right? We know it implicitly, that there's something just not right there. The fact is that there have been studies talking about cell phone usage, and this is $20 million study by the federal government, because they wanted to make sure absolutely beyond a reasonable doubt that they knew exactly what was happening with cell phone technology and cell phone usage. They found and they determined conclusively that there were carcinogenic effects. Now we're talking about what's going on with the 5G system. Just want to make sure everybody understands. The issue with 5G wireless deployment is not the convenience, because we all like the convenience. It's not the ease of deployment, because it's a lot easier just to pop something up on a tree than it is to actually bury it under the ground and route it to somebody's house in a hardware configuration. The issue is that 5G deployment, because it operates in a higher frequency band of 24 to 90 gigahertz, has to use a higher power density level to get through walls and get through solid objects. And that means you're going to have to put these things every 2 to 10 homes. So you're going to have a cell tower every 2 to 10 homes. Nobody would move next to a cell tower, right? So this is something that is a serious concern. And once again, remember that denial of request or denial of permit request that you can put in? It's going to point back to the acceptable levels as determined by the FCC, not the EPA or not the CDC, the ones who usually take care of health concerns, but by the FCC, which is staffed by former members of the telecommunication industry. That's the fox guarding the hen house. That was as a result of the 1996 Telecom Act. So I want to make sure everybody understands that. Sure, there are provisions in this bill that point to the idea of going off and measuring against acceptable health limits, but that's going to point back to the abnormally high FCC thresholds. And there's a chart in here. I'm really upset that I don't have my diagram in here, because it would make it very clear, and I'll make sure that everybody on this committee gets access to this chart. We talk about the acceptable limits associated with radiation thresholds in this bandwidth, and the United States is orders of magnitude above what you see in many of the other civilized Western countries like Switzerland or France or even India and Israel as well. And so these acceptable limits are way out of whack with what you see in these other countries. Matter of fact, they've outlawed Wi-Fi access in schools and classrooms inside of Israel, out in France, and actually in California in some areas they've done this as well. And I want to make sure people understand what these risks really are. This is not conjecture. The cell tower impact, so we talked about the cell phone usage. That was done in the United States, the federal government, with an NTP study. For cell towers themselves, they did a similar study, very thorough as well, out in Italy regarding cell phone tower usage. They found the exact same results that they found with the cell phone usage. And so the issue is now, with the Senate Bill 637 before us, is whether or not we're going to usurp local control and the ability to go off and provide safe zones for people that are electrosensitive. And frankly, those are just the people that are sense it, right? So there's a lot of other harmful effects that we may not sense until it's too late on a lot of these issues. And frankly, a kid's not going to be able to articulate what's wrong with them, or the fact that they're seeing ringing in their ears with tinnitus or something like that. The issue is, we've got, as legislators, and I'm not saying do away with all technology. There are ways of going off and getting the Internet of Things. You hardwire this stuff, and there are no issues. Actually, the performance is even better. So as we go forward, I just want to make sure that we provide at the onset right now, as all this stuff comes through and we're starting to learn more and more about the harmful effects of this radiation, we need to make sure that we protect the fundamental right for people to be safe, like we're talking about in Article 4, Section 51. And that means that this bill right now, which essentially usurps that authority and allows utilities to place these devices in any public right-of-way that's out there, which could be as close as 20, 50 feet from somebody's home, we need to make sure that we protect the ability of some people to petition against that, and local municipalities saying, no, not in our area. We're going to be a Wi-Fi radiation-free zone, if you will, to protect the citizens in that area. As we go forward, want to make sure that everybody gets communicated on what are these adverse health impacts, and we can do even more studies specific to the frequencies that are found in the 5G range here. But I want to make sure we understand the fact is the science has been settled on this. There are carcinogenic effects associated with cell phone towers and with cell phone usage. Matter of fact, if you actually read the fine print on every cell phone that you actually get, they actually talk about this. How many people here actually read that? That's the same thing with the fine print on this bill. I encourage everybody to oppose this legislation and just really try to honor our Article 4, Section 51 responsibilities as representatives of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for Senator Kolbeck? It appears there are not. I'm sorry, Vice Chair Lisinski.
Thank you, Senator Kolbeck. So you spoke a couple times about being concerned that if we have the permits, it would refer back to the FCC or other statements of what is the safe levels of radiation.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, we have a couple of bills that are before us, that are coming before you, or have been before you, that are coming to us. Do you also then oppose the no stricter than federal rule, where we would be limiting our ability to issue regulations in the state of Michigan that are stricter
Oh, in this
than
case,
federal?
in particular,
It wouldn't be in this case. The bill covers all cases. Would you be in support or opposition?
Vice Chair, I'm questioning the relevance of the question, since it...
Well, it seems to be that, as we're looking at this, if what we're saying is in this instance, we want to be able to regulate health effects.
I understand the political point. I'm wondering what the relevance is. I understand the political point, questioning the relevance to this discussion before us.
I'm asking if we want to start parsing out
I understand the political
effects.
point.
Yeah.
I'm questioning the relevance to the discussion before us.
Do you want me to answer your question about the relevance? I think that's what I was just stating, was the relevance
I
to
guess
this.
what I'm saying as chair is I don't think it's relevant.
All right.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, Ms. Stackover, we have you, and we have two gentlemen at the table. I'm not sure who they are. If they would, please identify themselves.